My name is Jim Reeder. I run the airport for the city of Ottawa here, and today we're interviewing our own local aviation legend, Chuck LeMaster. Chuck ran the airport for years and years and has had an amazing career in aviation, and so we're hoping to share some of his stories today. Chuck, could you tell us what some of your earliest recollections of aviation or things that made you become interested in aircraft and flying?
When I was real young, airplanes, I was really interested in them as a little kid. Uh, so airplanes was everything I wanted to mess with when I was for toys. But anyway, when I got older, I used to go out to the Conard Airport, which was the only airport in Ottawa at that time. It was 2 miles north of the city and 1.25 miles east. And it was had grass runways. It was a nice airport, and John Conard maintained it. He owned the airport. I used to go out there on my bicycle and watch airplanes fly, and listen to the guys in the lobby talking about stories, and it was interesting. I was really hoping someone would offer to take me for an airplane ride. Nobody ever did. Anyway, later on, I went out one afternoon and wanted to buy an airplane ride, and I asked the guy, I said, he wanted what he could do for me, and I said, I'd like to go for an airplane ride. I said, how much does it cost? And he said, $2. So I turned around and headed to the door, and he said, would you like to go? And I said, yes, but I don't have enough money. I only got $1.50. He says, I got an airplane I need to take for a check ride. He said, I'll just take you for that $1.50. So we went out, and he put me in the airplane, and we took off. And when we got in the air, I just made up my mind that day, this is what I wanted to do the rest of my life, and I did. Anyway, that's the story how I got started. Then, as I grew up, I started learning to fly when I could afford it, and I was soloed when I was 16 years old, and I got my private license when I was 17. You had to be 17 years old to have a private license. And actually, I made a little money, and I bought my first airplane when I was 16 years old, a 4-passenger airplane that was 1 year old. And I flew it for a while, and then at that time, young boys were being mandatory that they go into service, and so I didn't want to go to the Army. I wanted to get in the Air Force, and so I joined the Air Force, and I went right out of high school, and so the draft called my dad 2 days after I left for the Air Force, and I was lucky that they did get me first in the draft there. Anyway, I joined the Air Force, and I thought, being a private pilot, that I'd have it automatically made. I was in good physical shape, and I thought I'd become a pilot in the Air Force. Anyway, then I found out later that to become a cadet, you had to have 2 years of college. I didn't have that out of high school. So anyway, my military people figured out that I'd make a control tower operator better than anything else, so they assigned me that, and I went to school, became a control tower operator and approach controller. And while I'm there, the FAA at that time, when we completed the course, they had 6 tests to become a civilian control tower operator too. I couldn't go off the base, so I took the tests and I passed them. So I became an FAA certified control tower operator as well as military. And then I was assigned to one of the first supersonic jet training bases in the United States. There were three of those jet bases. And I was based at Laredo, Texas. And we were there reactivating a base that was a World War II base. And we had 100 airplanes there 50 of them jets and 50 of them T-28 piston airplanes that they taught pilots to fly first before transferring to jets. And it was 18 hours a day operation. Weather was always perfect. I don't know how we could be so lucky back years ago to have the weather that they had down there. Anyway, we had to fly with, the tower operators had to fly with the pilots in every airplane that, every different type of airplane that they had, because we were to know what problems they might come up against. And I flew in jets, I flew in a lot of DC-3s, C-47s, KC-97s, even flew in a B-25s. And
Chuck,
yes.
would you mind explaining, I know you've told the story about flying in the T-33 jet. Would you mind kind of expanding on that one?
Okay, my first time to fly in one of the jet trainers, they brief you how to get in it and how to eject, and it's very interesting because you have a 50 caliber shell that's under your seat, and you are instructed to put your feet in the stirrups and put your head back, and then when you're all situated that way, you got a trigger on the right side, and you pull that, and it'll shoot you and the seat out, and then it'll blow you through the canopy if you can't get the canopy to go. Anyway, we're briefed on that. The guy told me, he said, I've got radio contact with you, but he said, I have lights, the red and the green, and he said, I'll tell you to go, or if I can't talk to you, if you see that light turn red, you go ahead and eject. And so I'm taking all this in, and so this is, like I said, my first time in a military jet. Anyway, we take off, and before we took off, he told me, he said, if I tell you to go, he says, I'm going to give you 5 seconds to be gone, or I'll be seeing you.
Did the pilot do any maneuvers that you thought were special when you were on that ride with him?
Yes, he did. Yeah, we went up, and it was the first time I'd ever been that high, Jim. We climbed up to 43,000 feet, and he said, we're going to do some stalls. And so actually what happens in the stalls, they pull the throttle back. I watched him do this, and I knew kind of what he was doing all the time. And we pull up vertically, and we climb up like this, and the engine's behind the cockpit. And it's not like the airplanes that you learn to fly that have the weight up front when it stalls, it falls off. On this jet, when it gets up there, we were vertical till it stopped. Washers, little screws and things floated. I was impressed with that. Then it falls back like this. I see the throttle go forward. As it's coming down, we are dropping off, and we finally get back to flying normal again. And it was very interesting.
Now, didn't you tell me that you were invited to dinner at the pilot's house, and then shortly after that, he had an accident?
Yes, that's right. In fact, he invited me over to him and his wife's house that evening. I went over for dinner. They treated me real nice. And the next day, I'm on duty in the tower, and I have a call from one of the training planes midair east of the field. And binoculars, we started looking. There's always 2 of us in the tower. And we started looking. I saw 2 columns of smoke going up, and I had called the crash crew to send them out, of course. And I didn't know it until the next day, but the guy I flew with the day before was killed in that accident. And that was a sad deal.
Sure. Were there any other unusual things that happened to you while you were working in the control tower in the Air Force?
Well, yes. Well, let me say it like this. We had a lot of reports, not a lot, but a few reports of our pilots being out reporting UFO sightings. Mm-hmm. And I'm doubtful at this time that there are such things. But anyway, this one afternoon in 1953, clear day, clear as a crystal, and I'm looking out, and I can't believe what I see. I see this black elliptical object appearing towards the airport. Distance out how far, I don't know because I don't know size, but it came in and stopped. I'm seeing a UFO.
And this is right in the middle of the daytime. It's
about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as I recall. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I'm searching my mind. Am I losing it or what? And it sits there for maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Then it exits at a 45-degree angle south towards Mexico at a speed that's unexplainable. I mean, it's sitting here and it's gone. And today, anyway, back to that, my buddy turned around and he said, "Did you see what I saw?" And I said, "I sure did." He said, "What do we do?" I said, "Call it in and type it up." And he did. Then the Project Blue Book people got a hold of us. They took me up, seated me exactly where I was. They drew pictures of what I thought the size was on the glass, where it came in, where it went out. And that's my story, and I do believe in UFOs today. And my story's in Project Blue Book, and my name's in there with it too, okay?
Well, you also told me that while you were down there, you joined the Civil Air Patrol so that you could fly some of the Air Force's aircraft down there. And you also got your commercial license and began your crop dusting career.
Okay, yes, I joined the Civil Air Patrol, and the base commander, since I was in the Air Force and had my commercial license, they authorized me to fly the little liaison airplanes, and none of the guys hardly ever flew them there, but I got assigned to that, and they had me flying paperwork for the brass in different parts of Texas, and Texas is a big state. I did a lot of flying that way. I did some flying on emergency situations, situations like they had a big flood, and took the bridges out and everything, and the Red Cross flew in a big airplane, and the pilot wanted to go over to see the airport on the Mexican side, and he wanted me to take him over. When he got there with the airplane at 5 o'clock in the morning, he arrived. I take him over and bring him back, and then he flies the big airplane over there. And situations like that, and they had me fly some missions I can't tell you about. And anyway, I could fly all I wanted to, and the Air Force paid for the fuel, and I went out to the civilian airport quite often, and even took the government airplanes over there, which is I had permission. And one of the guys that had a large crop dusting business there had 8 airplanes, but they were short of pilots. And one day the guy that owned the place said, "Chuck, would you like to become a crop duster?" And he told me, he said, "It pays pretty good." Military pay at that time was $90 a month. And that was big money, I guess, back then, but it's still not enough. So I took him up on it, and I started working as a crop duster.
Now, back then, crop dusting was truly dusting, right? It wasn't liquid.
Yeah, not liquid. It was dust. And anyway, we got paid every Friday night. We go out, pick up our check in the desk there, and I was averaging $150 to $200 a week.
Well, and don't I remember you explaining that as the dust would come out of the little spreader on the bottom of the airplane, that you had a control to adjust the flow, and they described to you how to tell if it was the right amount?
Yes, and the way that worked, they had the mirror there that you could look at it, and the guys that taught me how to do this, they said, "You want that dust to come out of there and look like a white cloud in the beautiful blue sky. If it's darker," he said, "it's too heavy, and if you can see through it, you're too thin." So it was pretty easy to get into the deal on it. And it was very enjoyable. I liked it.
Would you tell us about what things were like when you came back to Ottawa from the Air Force?
Okay. When I got married in my last year there, and I had a little boy that was born on the day I was discharged. And I got out of the service in 4 years, and I was still on reserve for 4 more, but they never took me. I guess it was because I was married. But I come back to Ottawa, and I'd made arrangements before I left to the Conard Airport to lease it. Now, the city had built this Ottawa airport in the early 40s, and but I took over the North Airport, and the city was having trouble with the manager here at the time. He was having financial troubles, and one day, all the guys that had airplanes at Ottawa Airport flew them up and parked them at Conard Field. I couldn't figure out what was going on. They were upset with the city. And so the National Guard is the only ones that stayed here. And so the city got a hold of me and asked me if I would take over the city airport. And I did. And I worked a deal with the National Guard to take over the old Conard Airport where they'd have it all, and it worked out real good. Mm-hmm. And so I started flying out of Ottawa, and I did flight instruction, charter flights, and I even took on dealerships for airplanes. I bought my first brand new airplane in 1956, a Piper Tri-Pacer. And in 1956, I also took on the Cessna dealership.
And that was here at this Ottawa airport?
This here, right here. And we did very well, and people were wanting to learn to fly, and there was just a great demand for charter. I was flying day and night, and I started the spraying business, liquid, and I was one of the first ones to ever start aerial spraying in our area.
And didn't you buy the first Piper Pawnee spray plane in Kansas?
Yes, I did, 1960.
Brand new.
It was brand new. The first, it was a low wing, really a nice airplane, and spraying was growing constantly. When I finished and I sold out to the Ottawa Co-op years later, I never could get caught up in my agricultural spraying. Never could get caught up.
Always just way more work than there was
more
Chuck
more demand all the time. And in fact, all this noise you hear today going by us are aerial sprayings. It's in demand, and it's good money. I even thought I wanted to go fly for the airlines, and TWA offered me a job to do that, but the pay was like $250 a month for an airline pilot. So I was making more than that sometimes in a day at that.
At some point, you decided to increase the size of the airplanes you were using because you could spray for cities and railroad right-of-ways. And so could you tell a little bit about buying the first Ford tri-motor?
Okay. Back in 65 years ago, we were plagued with elm worms. We haven't had this problem since. But for several years, these elm worms would eat all the leaves off the elm trees, create webs. They were so thick that they'd fall on the streets and sidewalks. Cars' braking action was like driving on ice. And walking, you'd have to be darn careful or you'd fall, trip and fall. So cities started having me spray their cities. I started with single-engine airplanes, which couldn't do a good job. And the FAA really worked with me on everything. They told me, they said, Chuck, get a multi-engine airplane and we'll turn you loose at treetop level to spray cities.
Which is a more efficient way of doing it, the lower you can be.
And it could really do it. So I went to it, and I tried a Beechcraft 18, which was a good airplane, but it was too fast. And so I decided to get something slower, and I thought of a B-25 that was for sale in Missoula, Montana.
And what's a B-25?
It was a B-25.
What is a B-25?
A military bomber like the ones that went over Tokyo.
From World War II?
World War II. Anyway, I went up to look at it. While we're looking at it, the CEO made a statement. He says, Chuck, see that Ford Tri-Motor over there? And he said, if you want that, I'll sell it to you for the same money. And he said, it's ready to go spraying. And when I was a little kid at the airport, I remember the guys talking in the lobbies, you know, about the Ford Tri-Motor, how it would take off and land short anywhere, carry tremendous load, and they always complained about how slow it was. It was a 100-mile-an-hour airplane. This was going to fit perfect for spraying cities. So I bought the Ford Tri-Motor. And now then, I was flying home. Every time I'd stop, crowds of people would come around to look at that. this is it's 1929. And Henry Ford built the first all-metal airliners ever built in the United States. And he built 199 of them. And there's only about 5 left in the world today, and most of them are in museums. But this one I brought back, and it worked so good, the cities, I couldn't fly enough. I was just constant. Now that spraying of the cities ended about June 1st. And anyway, that was a cycle on the elmworms, but that happened for several years, worked out real good. And when the Ford was parked, everybody still kept coming and saying they wanted to ride in it. They'd like to take a ride in it. So I called Missoula and asked them if they had any tri-motor seats, and they said, "How many you want?" And so they sent me seats for the airplane. We put them in them, and so one day we decided to advertise on a Sunday on a hilltop over by old Bob's truck stop.
Did you just advertise on KOFO or in the Ottawa Herald?
No, just the Ottawa Herald, I think, at that time, and word of mouth. And we didn't know if it would work or not. And I-35 was there, and people off I-35 just constantly stopped to look at them. So anyway, on a Sunday, it was a beautiful day. I started flying. It would only carry 10 passengers in that one. And I flew 34 flights at $5 a head. And we made money on it. And then the word got out, and cities started calling us to come in for dedications, and wanted us to bring the airplane in, turned us loose to fly rides and everything. And it just kept growing, and it kept growing. We were booked every weekend. Even in the wintertime, we would go to places. California, New York, Canada, and I never did go into Mexico, of course.
So did you just stop the spraying business with it and devote the time to to barnstorming and giving rides with the tri-motor?
Didn't quit the spraying business. No, I stayed in spraying business for.
With the tri-motor, or you?
No, not with, but just with the normals.
Sure. Yep.
But the tri-motor part was still good for cities, but it was only good for a certain time of year. Anyway, we started barnstorming, and it just grew, and it was tremendous. Ice where the largest air show in the world is. We started flying there for them, and that's a week-long project. And I'd fly there 6 days a week, and it made money. And the tri-motor was a famous airplane, and it is today. They still barnstorm with a couple of them.
So the EAA has a Ford tri-motor that they can go around the country giving rides in today.
Yes, that was my first one.
That was
the
your
one
first.
They have is my first tri-motor.
And so the rides that they do up at Oshkosh are the same thing you did before they bought it from you.
And today the rides are $100 a seat.
And how many Ford tri-motors have you owned?
Okay, I've had 4 tri-motors in my lifetime, and I had a Boeing 247, which was built in 1931. They built 88 of them. American Airlines bought them all. And so I had the only one flying in the world, and wish I'd never sold it. Anyway, then I bought a Stinson tri-motor when I was barnstorming in Palm Springs, California. Found it in Colusa, California, and I used it for a sprayer, so we could keep the Ford going, barnstorming. Anyway, I barnstormed for over 20 years, and I've had one more airplane that I bought, which is a DC-2. The military nomenclature on it was a C-39.
And that was the forerunner of a DC-3?
Yes, sir.
Is that right?
Yeah. And anyway, a very strange situation. I bought that airplane, and when I landed at home, my secretary came out and said, "Chuck, you're to call the Air Force Museum and collect." And I said, okay. So I called him, and the guy I talked to, his name was Royal Fry. He was the curator for the museum at that time. He said, "Chuck, I understand you now own the C-39, and I said, "That's right." He said, "Don't fly it." He said, "Chuck, that's a missing link to the Air Force Museum." And he said, "Fly back here at our expense. We want to talk to you. So I did. And they treated me royally.
And so is that airplane, where does that airplane located now, the DC-2?
Well, here's what happened on that DC-2. They offered me anything the Air Force Museum had two of for the airplane. They couldn't buy it because that was against their policy. But anyway, I couldn't take anything they had. You know, I couldn't afford it to maintain it. Anyway, he said, okay, go home. He said, you're going to get an anonymous phone call. He said, make some money, but treat the guy fair, because, Chuck, we're going to get your airplane one way or another. That scared me, because I knew they could do it. I got the phone call from a guy in Florida. He had me come down and talk to him. And he had the largest engine shops in the state of Florida, had the largest supply of DC-3 parts in the world, and he was about 85 years old, and he treated me fair, and he offered me 3 engines for my tri-motor as long as I sent him the cores, and I did. So we did that, and he gave me a 0-time C-47 airplane and so much money. It all worked out good. And I had to deliver it to Miami, Florida, and it was delivered to Dayton, Ohio at the museum, Air Force Museum, by 2 colonels. And the Royal Fry called me the day that landed and thanked me for cooperating with them and everything, and said, Chuck, the airplane is flown for the last time. And so it's there in the Air Force Museum.
In Dayton, Ohio?
Dayton, Ohio, yep. That's the story on that one.
Of the tri-motors you've owned, I think, did you sell one of them to a pretty prominent family, and you got to go back and spend time with?
Yeah, let me get you ahead of that just a little bit.
Okay.
On that story, Jim. I had a partner on the first tri-motor, and a good one. And he didn't fly, but he did all the groundwork for the spraying and everything. And I did all the flying on both spraying and that. And I guess I was flying so much I couldn't handle it. I just couldn't handle it. So I made him a deal. I said, Dale, I'll take one of the corporations. And he was and he wanted the Ford. So I let him take that first Ford. And I took the spraying business. And anyway, the airplane that he took the ice guys to take over where I left off flying rides, and he parked it at Burlington, Wisconsin. In 1972, it was tied down, and a windstorm hit it and tore it all to pieces. Now, the EAA rebuilt that airplane, and that's the one that's still my first airplane that we had. Anyway, I'm spraying and doing along, and I fell in love with those tri-motors, and I started searching, and I wanted to buy another one just for the hell of it. And I found out American Airlines had 2, and they donated one to the Aerospace Museum, and they had another one in Tulsa that they wanted to sell. So I got a hold of them, and it was already committed to a guy that was going to buy it, but he never paid for it. And the guy I dealt with on that, I kept calling, has he paid for it? No, no. And so one day I called, and he said, Chuck, is that you? And I said, yeah. And he said, let me call you back in just a few minutes. So he called me back and said, Chuck, if you want the airplane, it's yours. We hadn't talked dollars yet. And so the other guy had made an offer much more than I would have. And so I went down and made arrangements, and I bought the airplane. And I overhauled all the engines, made it look mint. In fact, it's the one that you got the picture of in the office here.
I see.
And so Dale had a commitment for the Dallas DFW, the new airport at DFW, to take the tri-motor down there. And he told me, he said, Chuck, call them, and I'm sure they'll take you. And so I called them, and they said, okay. So what they wanted to do, the new DFW airport, they wanted me to fly down there. They wanted the Goodyear blimp, and they also had the Concorde, the the fast, high-flying air, the first time to ever land in the United States, the Concorde was going to land at DFW. They wanted it to land first. They wanted me to land second, and the Goodyear blimp to land third. And that's what we did. And then we all parked in a row together.
Weren't you involved in doing a few commercials too with the Tri-Motor?
Oh, yes. American Airlines had me make commercials for them in Los Angeles, 1-minute commercials. And back to the Dallas-Fort Worth, I flew rides there for 3 days, parked right by the Concorde. It was really something. But American Airlines wanted me to make a commercial in Los Angeles, which I did. I went out there, and we did it on the airport on a taxiway. And it was a 1-minute commercial of showing how American Airlines flew the Tri-Motors in their era. And they had a stewardess dressed in the passengers with old clothes on. An old car pulls up, a windsock there and everything. And it shows the hostess walking down the aisle saying, "Welcome aboard." Then it goes to the last 30 seconds, the same people and the same hostess dressed in modern clothes are walking down the aisle in a DC-10 and "Welcome aboard, glad to have you aboard." That's kind of how that commercial went, okay? And the one that Tri-Motor there, the one that's on the picture in there, when American Airlines had it, they had it on display at the New York World's Fair for 2 years, just sitting there in front of the big terminal building.
Huh.
But that's one, I got the second Tri-Motor.
Weren't the Tri-Motors involved in several movies too when you owned them?
Yes, yeah. One of them was The Family Jewels with Jerry Lewis. Another movie they used it in was The Rocketeer. And there was another one they used. They used it several times. I can't even remember all. It was just short blasts, you know. But
well, tell us about delivering one of the Tri-Motors to the Rockefellers.
Okay. And this is a Tri-Motor that you're talking about here. I bought in Bethel, Alaska. And it was a replica of a company that was going to build Ford Tri-Motors because they were so dang on famous. And they built the first one, and it went to Alaska to work on the pipeline. And I called the guy that owned it, and he was a lawyer in Anchorage, and he agreed to sell it to me. So I went up and looked at it, and I bought it and brought it home and made it brand new. I mean, it was mint. And anyway, one day I get a telephone call from a guy named Jim Rockefeller, and he wants to buy the airplane. And so he makes arrangements to come back to look at it. And he brings a mechanic with him. And at that time, I had it hangared at the airport at Emporia. So we go over and look at it, and I take and put him in the front seat with me the first flight. The second flight, we went around with the mechanic, and he wants to buy the airplane for the Owl's Head Museum in Owl's Head, Maine. But the guy that's buying it is Tom Watson, not the golfer, but the CEO of IBM. In fact, his dad started IBM. He was 68 years old, and he was our American ambassador to Russia at that time. He's still there. So anyway, they bought the airplane. They wanted me to do a few things to it. Give you a little illustration. They wanted it painted silver because it was going to be on the coast. They even built a hangar at the museum for this airplane. And so Jim Rockefeller calls me, and he said, "Chuck, I'd like to have you, if you can get someone to paint the American Airlines logo like they had in the 30s on it and everything." And he said, "Could you do that?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I could do that." And I got Art Connis, who was the local painter. He'd done a lot of work for me. Anyway, I thought after I hung up, I said, I better call him. I called him back, and I said, "Jim, you know, we better get permission to paint that on there, to do that." He said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "My dad and Tom Watson's on the board of directors of American Airlines. Just do it." I said, "Yes, sir." Anyway, I took it back, and they wanted me to come back several days early, and I did. And they wanted me to check Tom out in the airplane, and Jim Rockefeller wanted me to stay at the house. Can you believe me staying at the Rockefeller Mansion in Maine. It was nice. They treated me great. And
Didn't
yeah.
you say that they flew you out to a special island?
Okay, yeah. Well,
was
while I
kinda
was
famous?
there, Jim Rockefeller had a brand new airplane at his home there, and it had a runway. And he asked me, he said, "I've never flown this thing." He said, "Could you fly this Super Cub?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'd like to take you out to an island and show you. Tom's got a runway out there by his home, and he may want you to fly out there, and I'd like to show you where it is." I said, "Okay." So we take off and fly out there, and it's a beautiful home. I mean, it's and a beautiful runway and everything, and it's the only one on this end of the island. And I said, "Boy, that must be Tom's summer home." And he said, "No, that's his September home." I thought, what? Sees that? He said, "See that meadow on the other side of the runway there?" And yeah. He said, "That's the Morrow estate. That's where Charles Lindbergh used to come up and visit Anne Morrow." I mean, things are going on so fast, I can't keep up hardly, but it all worked out.
And didn't you say Charles Lindbergh landed at the Ottawa's Conard Field at one
Yes,
time?
the story is that years ago when the airlines were flying trimotors and the old airplanes, they didn't have navigation facilities. They had radios, but they didn't have them so they could navigate on them. But anyway, they would put in beacons every 10 miles between Wichita and Kansas City and across the
All
nation.
over the country.
And so that they could see these at night or daytime. And anyway, Lindbergh landed there and didn't think the Conard Field would be good because it was just about 10 or 12 miles south of where they should keep it on a straight line. And some people might remember there was beacon up Centropolis, Kansas, and that's what they had every 10 miles. Baldwin, they had them all the way.
In addition to the Rockefellers, did you give any other famous people rides in the Ford Trimotors?
Yeah, Jim, I give a lot of them. In fact, a lot of them I probably never even got to meet. You know, they were passengers. But let me tell you a story about the one that I figure is the best. One day I got a phone call from a guy in 1976, and we were having a tower demonstration, or a brand new tower built in Olathe, Kansas. And anyway, he called and he said, "Chuck, I understand you're going to be in Olathe with the trimotor." He said, "I'd sure like to be sure and get a ride with you in the airplane." And I've had people do this, but I said, we can do that. And I said, "By the way, what's your name?" And he said, "Neil Armstrong." And I said, "Neil, are you Neil A., the astronaut?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Neil, you're guaranteed a ride, okay? That'd be great." And I'm wondering why in the hell a man that's walked on the moon want to ride in a Ford Trimotor. Anyway, we meet, and what a gentleman he is. And so we visit outside the airplane a little bit, and I put him in the co-pilot seat, and while we're loading passengers, he starts giving me stories. "Chuck, well, the reason I wanted to ride with you," he said, "when I was 7 years old, my dad bought me a ride." He said, "My dad bought me a ride on a Ford Trimotor." And he said, "That day, I made up my mind aviation was going to be my career." I put my right hand on his left shoulder, and I said, "Neil, you've done real well."
So
Yeah.
Neil got to ride in the co-pilot seat
Yes.
in the front with you.
Yeah, yeah.
In your flying career, flying people like Neil Armstrong and getting to know the Rockefellers a little bit, did you ever meet any other famous pilots that people might recognize?
Well, I met a lot of them, Jim. It's just endless on that. Bob Hoover, who was one of the very famous pilots. But
What were they like? Just as people when you weren't, I mean, Bob Hoover, for example.
Bob, he had a mood of his own. He was quite a guy, and he had famous for that hat he wore, and everybody knew Bob Hoover. And he was okay. And I'm going to say this, he's probably the best pilot in the world I ever did see. And what he did, he put on air shows and he never missed. He hit everything just perfect. And but I've flown a lot of people, Jim. Let's take it for instance, if someone was famous for some reason, like my wife would come up in the cockpit and say, "Chuck, behind you in the first seat is Neil Diamond." and a famous singer, you know. And I turned around and looked at him and winked at him, and he smiled, you know. But it's thousands. I've flown thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and who knows how many.
Did you ever see Neil Armstrong again after that?
Yes, I did. The same year. They had a $1,000 a plate dinner in Atlanta, Georgia for Anma Lindbergh. And so they wanted the tri-motor for the door piece, where the cars would pull in and military personnel with white gloves would open the doors and take them into the hangar, you know. And so I had to go to the restroom, and I'm sitting on the other side of the airplane. And anyway, I knew where the restroom. I'm outside. I'm walking on the outside, and I hear someone running behind me, Chuck. And I turn around. Hell, it's Neil Armstrong. And he said, "How's our old girl doing?" And I said, "Neil, it's doing real good." And we visited a little bit there, and then, of course, he said he had to get back in, of course, and that was the last time I saw him. And there's one part of this story that Neil never got to know. Anyway, I had a friend that worked at NASA that figured the weight and balance for the space shuttle, and he knew Neil real well, too. And he sent me pictures and told me that Neil's picture was by a tri-motor that was painted white. And we got to checking over, and Neil rode in the same airplane that he took his 7-year-old when he rode 7 years old.
So when you took him for a ride in the Ford tri-motor, neither one of you knew
neither one
that
of
was
us.
the same tail number as he had actually taken his first ride in.
Yep. Right.
What about, you flew Senator Bob Dole several times
when
too,
I
didn't you?
got out of the Air Force, opened up the airport here, I flew charter all the time, and Bob Dole's crew asked me if I'd fly him around to different events, and I did many times. The last time I flew Bob Dole was 1976 when I had a helicopter that I bought, a brand new Hughes helicopter, and I flew him around in that a little bit, but that was the last time.
The first helicopter you bought, the Hughes, in 1976, did you give rides in that?
Yes, but it was too expensive to operate. Helicopters are very expensive. I got it, and I got my commercial helicopter rating and instructor's rating for helicopters, but Jim, just no way that I could afford to keep it, and tri-motors and everything I was doing.
But isn't there kind of a story about the first time you gave rides? It was close to Christmas, and where the Tractor Supply store is in Ottawa now, it used to be a Gibson's department store.
Yeah, kind of funny. Anyway, what happened there is I had my commercial license and all set to go, but they were going to deliver Santa Claus to these different places, and they wanted me to take Santa Claus over there. And so the guy comes out, and he's dressed up in his Santa Claus suit, and we get in the airplane, and he said, "How long have you been flying?" And I said, "Well, you're my first customer."
Because you had just gotten your commercial rating in the helicopter, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Now, did you ride with me in that day?
I did that day.
Yeah, I thought
about just 10 years. I wanted to go back just a little bit. The Ruskin Heights tornado in 1957.
Yes.
You were running the airport here.
Yes, I was
you
right
saw
here.
That. Would you tell us about that?
Okay, it was late in the afternoon, and I had my camera, and I was looking west of the airport down towards Homewood and Williamsburg, and I saw this very dark cloud in the west, but mostly north and south. It was clear as a crystal, but I could see this storm originating, and I watched it, and I saw 4 different funnels, little ones, come out and rotate around, not touching the ground, but they finally congealed into one. And I thought, boy, that's a tornado, all right, but it's not touching the ground. Well,
and you're right here at this airport.
This airport,
that day,
right where we're sitting, maybe 100 yards from where we're sitting right now. Anyway, I watched it form, and I saw the debris go up into it. I called my mother and told her to hit the basement, and I called the police department, sheriff's department, and told them what was happening. And I watched it come across, and I got my people, and we all got in cars and drove south.
Did it come across, which side of Ottawa did it go
it
through?
came just south of Ottawa, about where Walmart is today, in that area there. And it raised heck with, and it killed 2 people just north of the airport here, a couple miles. And then it went on to hit Ruskin Heights. After it went by, my dad was here. And we got in a brand new Cessna I had, and I thought it would follow it and just see how bad the destruction was. And we followed it a ways, and air was so turbulent, I shouldn't have done it. But when I followed it a ways, not all the way. I turned around and came back, thank goodness. But it killed a lot of people. I don't know how many people were killed in the Ruskin Heights area. But anyway, the pictures I took, there was a guy in town that borrowed them to put in a book, and he did a nice job. And I found out later my pictures were in encyclopedias.
About tornado formation?
Yeah, about the Ruskin Heights tornado, right.